one evening last week, as twilight clung to the windows of my home, I sat in my favorite chair reading. Okay, well, it's really more like my bulldog's chair. And she just lets me squeeze in there with her. We have an unusually close relationship. Mostly because I think I'm the one who can tolerate her smell. She nestles in and falls asleep as I turn the pages of Kazuo Ishiguro's novel, When We Were Orphans. Addie, the bulldog, sighs as I slip into the reverie of the novel. There's a small side table next to that chair. It was made from a slice of a smallish tree trunk, the edges left rough. The growth rings are, of course, visible, and I notice that they intersect with the rings from my coffee cup. There's a knothole that goes right through it, the table. And every time I look at that table, it whispers patience, patience. On that table is my favorite glass from which to sip bourbon. The glass is matte black on the outside, but on the inside it is made of glass and it's shiny, it's reflective. And when the light from my reading lamp falls into the bourbon on the glass, the glass itself begins to emit this amber glow that seems cosmic in its origins, as if there's an inner light that shouldn't be there, but it is. I turn a page, and Addie begins to softly snore. Ishiguro's precise prose draws you into thinking you're getting a complete accounting of his story, but then you realize there's always something he's not telling us. Some important detail that hangs just over the horizon, hidden by the dawn's light, but looming somehow back there. I find it such a sublime way to tell a story, holding the reader in that liminal space between knowing and not quite knowing, quietly asking for patience, because the next part is really important, and yet never quite revealing the thing of it, the thing of the story, the thing of the twilight clinging to that window, the thing of the bulldog sleeping on my lap. I reach for the bourbon, and as I do, I notice a tiny fruit fly has alighted on the rim of the glass, and before I can brush it away, it falls, or perhaps it dives into the glass. Perhaps it too could not resist the allure of that glow, and I peer into the ethereal amber, and there it is, this fly, adrift on the surface tension, its wings too wet and heavy to escape by any usual means. And I dip a fingertip into the liquid and lift the diminutive being out. And in writing this, I looked up synonyms for tiny. And friends, I found the list to be arresting. It begins with terms like minute, mini, baby, toy, pocket-sized, fun-sized, petite, miniature, microscopic. You're welcome. You're welcome here too. Infinitesimal. But somewhere in the middle of the list, the thesaurus takes a darker turn. The tone shifts from fairly neutral to something a bit more heartbreaking. Tiny, as in trivial, negligible, insignificant, unimportant, inconsequential, pitiful, pathetic, miserable. I let the fly roll off my fingertip and onto one of the tree rings on the side table. It was small and wet, and I have no idea of the effect of alcohol on a fruit fly system, or whether it would survive to live out its 30-day or so lifespan. But I didn't find it of no consequence, of no importance. Strange how we would equate size to importance, given our infinitesimally small existence in this universe. For those of you who are wondering, and I know they're out there, yes, I did drink the whiskey, even after extricating the fly. Perhaps you find that gross. But there was something in that moment that felt like sharing. And maybe you would have killed the insect, but there was something in that moment that did not require my violent intervention. Now, to be clear, I am no saint in this. My day-to-day unconscious consciousness, the kind of autopilot of my everyday living, in that saving fruit flies is not really my normal way of being. When an ant, for example, wanders across my cutting board as I mince garlic, I most often crush it with my fingertip and brush it away, just continuing on my task. I do this without consideration, without any true malice, nor with any regret. This isness of these small violences just seems so natural, instinctive, perhaps even necessary. But sometimes there is this energy that I rest within, that is filled with the whispers of tree ring, patience, and amber glow, and I find myself, perhaps my truest self, far less casually cruel and far more able to share a bit of whiskey and the sighing warmth of an old English bulldog. In those moments, there's nothing that is insignificant, nothing that is miserable, nothing that is tiny. And there is something in those moments where I'm touching the edges of this awakening to love. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron puts it this way. She says, the earth seems to be beseeching us to connect with joy and discover our innermost essence. The earth seems to be beseeching us to notice the way twilight clings to the windows of our home, beseeching us to notice the beauty that arises from patience, notice where the energy we call light is absorbed and reflected in ways that bring us both a knowing and an unknowing. Noticing that there is nothing tiny that is insignificant. Notice that where we look for happiness, where we expect to find it, is not where it lies. Notice the thing we think we need to find joy isn't a thing at all. It's certainly not a shirt. And notice, too, that I'm pretty sure you all have touched those edges of your awakening to love. Found yourselves in a moment of presence to the earth's beseeching call and stretched out your fingers, your hands, your heart. And what you might have found there is joy, maybe. Or maybe it's more like contentment or connection or something that you have been yearning for. But life always seems to get in the way, and you end up smushing the ant, crawling across the cutting board mindlessly, without malice, and not attentive to the violence of it. And we feel the tension of that, right? We feel the tension of it, the pull between who we wish to be, who we yearn to be, and the routine necessities of just living out this life. Especially when other humans merely being make it so damn hard to stay in the space of joy. To stay in that space of compassion, to stay awakened to love for longer than just a few minutes sitting in meditation or walking in the meadow or touching the soft fur behind a bulldog's ear. By the way, that is sublime. We have these seemingly fleeting moments of peace and clarity interrupted by the demands of the next thing to do on the list, the laundry, the errands, the work to be done, the next meeting or the last one, the planning, the emails to be read and deleted. Moments interrupted by your news feed that screams the score, who's winning and who is losing in the latest political fight. It's a meaningless score, by the way. Most days it's abundantly clear that there is no winning. Most days, all I observe is how much we all are losing. And the longer we think of these political fights in terms of contention of winners and losers, the farther away our awakening to love becomes. Nonetheless, we live in that tension. What Pema Chodron calls the chaos. That disconnection between our awakening and our day-to-day existence. Now, Chodron, this great Buddhist teacher, offers us a kind of prescription, a possible way through, a kind of resolution to that tension, a way to relate with what seems to stand between us, what seems to stand between us and the happiness we deserve. The first part of Chodron's path is what she calls no more struggle. She also calls it going to the places that scare us. Chodron writes, "This is the primary method for working with painful situations, global pain, domestic pain, any pain at all. We can stop struggling with what occurs and see its true face without calling it an enemy. Our pain is not an enemy. Our country's pain is not an enemy. The global pain isn't an enemy. It helps to remember, she says, that our practice, and here she's talking about a meditation practice, but I think it's just the practice of awakening, right? The practice is not about accomplishing anything. It's not about winning or losing, she writes, but it's about ceasing to struggle and relaxing ourselves into just what is. And I think it's exactly those moments where I am able to, as I say, feel the edges of the awakening to love. When I stop struggling, when I stop keeping the score, when I perhaps guide the ant away from my food without feeling the need to kill it because it is tiny, because I have been taught to equate size with importance. Children offers a second path, and I kind of like this one. I struggled with this one a bit. She says, use poison as medicine. Use poison as medicine. And when we think about it, the difference between medicine and poison is a matter of dosage. So it's not a matter of avoiding the poison, but taking in just enough to transform dis-ease into ease. In practice, Children writes, when anything difficult arises, any kind of conflict, any notion of unworthiness, anything that feels distasteful, embarrassing, or painful, instead of trying to get rid of it, we breathe it in. We breathe it in, not just our own, but for everyone. Let me breathe in your discomfort. Breathe in your pain. The poison is not just our personal misfortune, she writes, our fault, our blemish, our shame. It is part of the human condition. It is our kinship with all living things, the material we need in order to understand what it's like to stand in another person's shoes instead of pushing it all away or running from it. We breathe it in and connect with it fully. We do this with the wish that we, all of us, could be free of suffering. And then we breathe out, sending out a sense of big space, a sense of ventilation, of freshness. And finally, Children invites us, her third path, to regard what arises in your life as the manifestation of awakened energy. This is a little confusing to hear, but she says we can regard ourselves as already awake. We can regard our world as already sacred. We don't need to make it sacred. It already is. And what she means here, I think, is that all that stuff that seems to interrupt our awakening to love, all that chaos and fighting and worry and fear and death, that is awakened energy too. In other words, awakening doesn't just happen when we're alone at twilight with our bulldog and some whiskey or tea, if you prefer. Sometimes it's tea. And a novel. It is always available, always present, and often in unexpected form. Awakened energy, what Children calls the manifestation of wisdom, comes to in the mundanity of our daily life, as well as in the conflicts we bear witness to and feel powerless within. There is always something to be learned. about ourselves, about this world, some place in which to grow. Children writes, we are trying to learn not to split ourselves between our good side and our bad side, between our pure side and our impure side. The elemental struggle is with our feeling of being wrong, with our guilt and our shame at what we are. That is what we have to befriend. The point is we can dissolve the sense of dualism between us and them, between this and that, between here and there, by moving forward what we find difficult, by moving toward what we find difficult and wish to push away. And this is the wisdom that can arise when we stop trying to push away the difficulties of our lives and instead rest in our wholeness. Learning to blur the edges between those dualisms and play in the liminal spaces between them, and in so doing, know this world is already sacred. Know ourselves as already awake. As most of you know by now, I hope, I will be leaving this ministry in about a month. Like exploring Ishiguro's novels, there is something, I think, just over the horizon, hidden by the dawn's light, that I just can't quite see. And that something holds me in this liminal space between knowing and unknowing. And it's asking for patience, because the next part's important. For me, I am soon off to go find out whatever is hiding over that horizon, or perhaps I'm the fly diving into the amber light that shouldn't be there, but is anyway. Bright morning stars are rising, and day is a breaking in my soul. And today I invite you to hold one another in that liminal space, in that same liminal space between knowing and unknowing. I invite you all to rest in that energy that releases you from your striving, from your to-do list, from your contested and divided living. I invite you all into your patience with yourselves and with the others, with one another. I invite you all to feel the twilight clinging to the windows of your home, and know too that day is a breaking in your souls. Bright morning stars are rising. They are always rising, calling us to know our awakening to love. Amen, my friends. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.